to the state of Potsdam. There are 16 states in the country of Germany. Berlin is the largest and the largest city with 3.4 million people, and they come from 190 different countries, making up the very diversified city of Berlin. We are leaving the city of Berlin and heading towards Potsdam, the capital of Brandenburg. Why? A history buff. I love history. I am quite literally a road scholar. I'm a scholar of the road. I learned a lot of history, and I think it's fascinating to share it with you in the areas that we're in. So I hope you will enjoy some of this. And as we head out today, we'll talk about history and the city of Berlin. Please note that what we're seeing out the windows right now, we are coming back to this afternoon, and we will have a full-on city tour this afternoon, which is actually only 2 blocks away from our hotel, to an area known as the Kadiba, the main shopping area. This will be your lunchtime this afternoon, and after lunch we'll be meeting up with Jasmine, our local guide. She will take us through her beautiful city of Berlin, east and west side.
Was excellent.
Now I will share a small story with you. My first introduction to Berlin, I was 19 years old and I was backpacking after university, and my friend Holly and I were in Munich. We heard something was going on up in Berlin, so we hopped on a train and headed up. Guess what was going on? The wall was coming down. It was actually not only fascinating to be part of that event, but it was a little frightening as well, because nobody knew for sure what was going on. A lot of cheers, a lot of tears, and the wall itself was amazing. It was under, on the East Berlin side,
Mr. Gorbachev,
it was still whitewashed with bullet holes in it from shooting people that were trying to escape. On the West Berlin side, it was very colorful. It's been chipped away. It's been set aside as a statue, as a memorial. So I'm also asked often, can we take part of it home with us? Can we go chip a little off? Well, my answer to that is, would you go chip a little off of David? In Italy? No, because it has been set aside as a memorial now, as a piece of art. However, with that said, I will pass this around. You can buy postcards with a little tiny piece of the wall in them, and you can even see these at our hotel, so you can pass. Hohenzollern family of Prussia. This area was part of Prussia. Now, if I tried to go through every royal family in Germany, we would be here a month. There were 300 ruling royal families in what we see as Germany today. Berlin Wall. So when we talk about Germany today, the borders we know today, it wasn't always that way. So 300 ruling royal families breaking up Germany into a crazy patchwork, if you will. And that's just Germany. That's not even Austria, Czech, Slovak, Hungary, Poland. Each of them had a different royal family. And that is quite a literal translation. The Hohenzollern family took their name from their king itself. Goes back to about the 13th century. There's a Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic came in 1918 with the fall of the ruling royalty. 19 really would lead to the end of the monarchies in Central Europe. Now, in between there, we have some really interesting people that we talk about, and Frederick the Great is one of them. Area of Potsdam, we talked a little bit about the Hohenzollern family. Frederick the Great was one of the Hohenzollerns. He chose to make his royal residence in Potsdam, and that's where we're going this afternoon, or this morning, is the Sans Souci, without worry, in French, without worry. It was also sensed, Hohenzollerns here. Some folks ask me about the Wittelsbach family. The Wittelsbach family were a royal family, a ruling royal family in Bavaria, Bajuwaren. And they were the ones with Mad King Ludwig and the fairy tale castles and so forth. They're much further south of us, and that's a whole different tour. But the ruling royal war. With the war came the Black Plague. You see, the military armies of Europe were marched through Central Europe. What followed the military men was the camps. What followed the camps and the food was the rats. What was on the rats? The fleas, and they carried the plague. 6 waves of bubonic plague swept through, opens up the religious freedoms of this area, and people start immigrating. Why? Chancellor Adolf Hitler will shake hands on the Garrison Church, and this will become known as the official start of the Day of Potsdam, symbolizing a coalition of the military, of the Reichswehr military and Nazism. It's basically when the Nazi party, political party, becomes synonymous with a military party. Wannsee. Now this beautiful lake that we will be seeing in just a moment has a very, very dark side of world history events. As we go along in the next few days, we will go over how these steps led up to the final solution. But what does that term mean? Well, if you ask the Holocaust denialists, those that do not believe that this happened, they will say at this conference, the word killing of the Jews was never mentioned. However, when Eichmann was interrogated in the 1960s, he did mention that after the conference, when cognac was being served, the members that were at the conference were very blatant about talking about the how to eliminate the bodies, the possessions, and how to go about this mass killing. Now, in his speech, Heydrich was in charge of this meeting. He spoke for 90 minutes. He spoke to a conference of 16 men, 8 of whom held doctorates. This was not a stupid crowd. This was well-educated people. He said the final solution of the Jewish problem, the Jewish question, was to take the Jews from their homes because they needed the space because of the demolition of the houses during the war, and also the Germans coming home. The Russians occupied the Baltic states. Any German or person of German heritage wishing to come home to the Reich could come home, but they needed housing. So where to get the housing? Oust the Jews. This is where the Jewish ghettos came from. They weren't living in the ghettos. They were taken from their homes. They were taken from their places of business. And 2 days later, a German family was there. This was one step. Then the Nazis had the idea, what do we do with the Jewish ghettos and these people living in them? We send them to Northern Africa. This was an idea, a mass migration of get them out of Europe. This was the idea. This didn't work. The whole plan was grandiose and beyond concept to us today, but Hitler thought on a grandiose scale. Then the final solution, the final question, this is where this term final comes into play. When Heydrich spoke, here we have the Villa. These are all part of the villas that I was speaking of. And the Lieberman Villa is here on our left-hand side. This was the artist Max Lieberman on our left-hand side. Now, when these men got together and Heydrich spoke, he said, we'll take part of Eastern Europe. We'll take the Jewish people. We will separate them into those able by sexes, and then those able to work, we will put them into labor for making roads and factories. Those unable to work will be surely the most resistant and must be treated as enemies of the Reich. After all, they will be the seed of the next generation, and hatred will grow from there. So, and in the conference here, and we're coming up on our right-hand side to the Wannsee Villa. In the conference, when he discussed these issues taking place, there was no doubt as to what he meant. Here on our right-hand side, you'll be able to see the villa itself, just through the gates here. The villa is now a memorial. It was proposed to be a memorial in 1965, but that was denied. It wasn't until 1976 that was turned into a memorial. Now, when Eichmann was interviewed in the 60s, he said that afterwards, after the conference, when cognac was being served and the men were standing together, the conversation changed. But again, the denialists will tell you that the words killing were never issued during the conference itself. And that is true in the minutes of the conference, that no utterance of the word mass execution was written. Potsdam Conference at the end of the war. This is also, here you start to see some of the grounds and the lakes that surround the castles and the palaces. This is also why at the end of World War II there was a lot of concern as to how to preserve. And we're going over, I'm going to interrupt for a minute, we're going over the Gleinik Bridge now. You'll see the Gleinik Palace over to your left-hand side. Right where we are right now is where many spy exchanges happened at the end of World War II. This is where the Cold War spy exchanges would take place. Now, getting back to the palace. This means the world would be a poorer place without the palace. So I think you will, and it's just a few minutes down the road, and then we'll head back into the city. Steenhof is where the conference was held for the post-World War II. Basically, the occupying forces of U.S., Britain, and Russia came together with representatives of Stalin, Churchill, and Truman. Now, Truman had only been president of the United States for a few months. Stalin had occupied most of Eastern and Central Europe, and Churchill distrusted Stalin immensely. And of course, Roosevelt had been in most of the pre-conferences up to this point, including the Yalta. When Truman took office, Roosevelt had a philosophy of dealing with Stalin in that he didn't distrust him. He thought that if we give a little, we'll get a lot. Give him a few things he wants, and then we'll be able to get what we need in the rest of Europe. Testing was done with the Manhattan Project out in the desert in the United States, and Churchill and Truman talked about this, and they both agreed that the weapon should be used because the war was still going on in Japan with no end in sight. There was a lot of debate between the two. Should they tell Stalin? They didn't tell him for a long time. It was fascinating in the fact that he already knew about it. He had spies in the Manhattan Project for many, many years during the development, so this was not a surprise to him when Truman goes up during the conference and says, "We have a new weapon of immense destructive power." It was used, of course, bringing to the end of the war in Japan. But during the conference itself, these were all underlying factors.